But if you imagine dealing with that, that's like your RAM must be so huge. Random access memory, right? What you're using in order to just map out your day must be so full of so much stuff. How can you concentrate? In any case, Leibniz wasn't liked by people, but even at I think the age of 16, he ended up finishing his PhD in law, I believe.
Was it
Here we
easier
go.
back then?
Pardon?
Was it easier back then?
On that regard, I remember when Albert Schweitzer was not allowed to become a missionary to Africa for France because he was German, because all the ministers had to be French. So he went back to school for 2 years to get his medical degree. So at least roughly around World War I, 2 years is all you needed in order to get your medical degree. So that's kind of, yeah. So what did they need back then? But he earned his license and doctorate in law. Normally it took 3 years. In 1666, the University of Leipzig turned down Leipzig's doctoral application and refused to grant him a doctorate in law. But he left Leipzig and went to the University of Altdorf and submitted the same thesis, and there's the title of it, and he earned his doctorate that November from that university. And then they offered him an appointment to teach. I think he's 16 at this time. No, not interested in teaching. I want to get out there and see Paris and do stuff. And so he does. He ends up getting a job for the Duke. And this is George, who is eventually going to become, I believe, George the First of England. So that's not happened yet. But in any case, so he ends up as a secretary and so on. But he ends up getting jobs, and what he wants to do is get out into the world and get away from the academic environment. And so he ends up eventually getting to France for the Elector of Mainz. Where's George come in? Oh, Christian Huygens. I should mention the Huygens. We highlight these individuals, but there's a whole slew of people that are all being developing during this time period. So Leibniz is not alone. I mentioned Sir Isaac Newton as a competitor in things, but both Sir Isaac Newton and Leibniz are learning from others who have already learned a lot and are passing it on, right? So it's a interesting situation. Who are the hubs of these people? The hubs being the ones that are really I think the significant players that connect people. Remember, Father Mersenne was the one who don't know so much about any of his own writings, but being in Paris and writing to all these people, he's the one that brings them together, and they meet one another through him. And even Father Mersenne is the one that keeps in touch with Descartes, one of the only ones as far as they know, so that if you wanted to get in touch with Descartes, you had to write to Father Mersenne, and he sent your letter on, right? And then when Descartes sent the letter, he didn't send it directly to you, he sent it to Father Mersenne, and Father Mersenne would send it on to you. So there are hubs to these networks that are really important. When I don't know if Ukraine still gets the information. Apparently, the president said no more info for you, right? But it used to be that one of the main things you wanted to bomb of the enemy was the hubs, because that meant they were the communication hubs for the units. And so if you blew up those, you knocked out the whole network, right? So figuring out who's the headquarters, who's the command post, blow them up, and that's, they're basically chickens without their heads, running around. And that's one of the things that the president just recently said, no more info for you from our intelligence service. Remember, I used to be in military intelligence, so I feel, that was an important thing. However, Kristen Huygens is definitely one of those people that had a big impact on everybody, including life. So historically, he goes and spends some time in France. Notice he also gets to visit the Royal Society, and that's where they're discussing his calculating machine, even though they didn't get a working copy. The interesting thing about his calculating machine was it did logarithms, right? So he's inventing calculus, and if you're doing calculus, you know how you usually have the back pages of, the list of your logarithms, so you can go check them. Well, he had a machine that literally did that, double check them. When we talk about calculating machines, of course the abacus, I guess, is about the oldest in human history, and you can still buy them. At least I bought one in the International Mall in Honolulu. Cute little wooden, abacus. Bought it in the box. It's still in the box, and it still has a book of directions that I never read. There's a theme here, right? That's also Chinese, so that might actually be part of the connection. In any case, the previous machines that we think of was Blaise Pascal's. And that's considered to be the first of the mechanical calculators. That didn't do as many things. It added and subtracted, multiplied and divided, I believe. And why did Pascal invent that? Not only because he was a mathematician, but his father was a tax collector, and he was basically trying to help his dad out. So that's kind of interesting. Have we talked about Blaise Pascal at all? Probably not, but he's usually one of the more significant philosophers that we should mention. He died actually fairly young. I'm under. I want. Just to give you an idea. Another French mathematician. His triangle is considered important. If you've done math, you get his triangle, which if you have an implement that enables you to do a triangle. You have 1, 1, 1. Well, if I take 1 and 1, I end up with 1. You actually get 1s all the way down on this side too, right? But as you go in the middle here, you get 1, 1, 2. If I have 1 and 2, I get 3. How does that go? 1, 2 gives you 3, and then I don't have enough space here. But basically, you end up with a way of just automatically filling in all the rows. And if you get all the way down and you look at the row, that's pretty silly, isn't it? That's easier to see. There's one. Right? So you get the idea. You could fill in the triangle very easily, right? You see how it goes? You see how the pattern is? But the neat thing about it is when you do I keep wanting to say algorithms, but it's algebraic calculations, right? Those are the ones like 1x plus 2x plus 3 cubed, whatever. Am I doing that right? I haven't had math for like 100 years, so I don't know. But in any case, you end up noticing that it actually follows this pattern exactly, so that basically you could just take the row and that's your answer for any of the algorithmic, not algorithmic, it's, darn it, algorithm is an Arab, Jabra, there you go, thank you, Al-Jabra. That's actually his name. But so Pascal figured that out. He also gave us Pascal's wager, which is right here. This is theoretically not a video game. Sorry about that. That is, Pascal became a language. Yes, if you do computer languages, but and yes, it is named for him. But in any case, the argument for the existence of God. He basically says, well, you've got 4 possibilities. I won't put them up, but you have 4 possibilities. Either God exists or God doesn't exist. That's 2. Then you either believe in God or you don't believe in God. That's the other 2. So you have mapped those 4. And you see what the church says, if you believe in God and God exists, you have an infinite reward in heaven. If you don't believe in God and God exists, you have an infinite punishment in some nasty place, right? If, on the other hand, God doesn't exist and you believe in him, you give up a finite amount of whatever pleasures you might have had otherwise, right? If, on the other hand, God doesn't exist and you don't believe in him, then you have a finite amount of pleasures because you're not giving up whatever because you don't believe in God. Well, if you do the same thing with a horse race and you basically have $1, if you bet on the horse and the horse wins, it's 50-50, you would be foolish not to bet on a horse when you have a 50-50 chance when the reward is like $1 million. 50-50 chance? That's like, why would you be so dumb as to not bet on that kind of a situation, right? And it's basically the same kind of gamble, wager, it's, Pascal's wager, right? That just makes common sense for you to bet that God exists and do the things that you're supposed to in order to have an infinite reward in heaven. So that's an interesting argument. He did have an illness at a certain point or something that essentially caused him to become very religious just before he died. But he was interesting. He invented a lot of things. He's another fascinating philosopher from that time period. Keep doing that. How am I not getting out of these things? Seems like the computer keeps finding more things for me on him. Okay. But back to Leibniz. Leibniz's theological writings. This is part of Russell's critique. Well, what are those theological writings? Well, number one, this is the best of all possible worlds. This is, I think I mentioned what Voltaire was most critical of. Voltaire writes a play called Candide. Here it says it's a novel, but basically you have optimism. What is optimism? What is optimism? Any of you optimistic? Hoping for the best, right? I'm a pessimistic optimist. I don't think things can get any worse. Okay, that could be funny. Maybe it wasn't.
I once saw a joke that was like almost exactly similar, where it's the pessimist saying it can't get any worse. The optimist says, yes, it can.
Okay. Well, I'm kind of playing on that same dilemma there. But so Candide is a play, and one of the characters is Dr. Pangloss. Pan meaning all in Greek, and gloss meaning like a glossary. He knows everything. This Dr. Pangloss knows everything.